Art, the European masters, journalism, old black and whites, art of war, music, criminology. It's been in my life as long as I can possibly remember. And then a day would come. Like many people, I grew up listening to the stories of my father about heraldry and ancestry. And then the day would come that I would need to lean on all of that when my family property came under fire by disruptive politics, occult-based crime, and it would be the one place that I would have to take my stand and share with the world what it means to carry the strap. What if I told you that this one single piece of art could unlock the mystery to some of the longest-standing criminology unsolved serial mass murders in history? In this episode, I'm going to be presenting the theory that how this one piece of art will connect the Jack the Ripper case with the Zodiak Killer, along with the current disruption that we are seeing at the US-Mexico border. Now, I know that's a tall tale. In this episode, I'm going to show you what I believe is overwhelming evidence that will show that the Jack the Ripper murders and the murders of the Zodiak Killer are actually connected by a signature which supports terrorist activity, all by a same group of individuals that are still active today, active in West Texas, active in the Middle East, active in America, but more importantly, active in a east to western pattern, which is going to be very significant at a later time. So stick around, we have a lot to digest here. The first documentary clip we're going to review is a History Channel documentary based on the 20-year investigation by a Swedish journalist named Christopher Holmgren. Now, when I ran across his work, he had compiled a lot of the old archival news, journalism, photography, and art, which is exactly what we're going to be going over. Now, his work is correct, and I'm going to tell you how my research based in cryptology and symbology verifies that he is accurate, and that yes, he did find who actively conducted some of the murders, but I am going to show how law enforcement was involved, multiple people were involved, and that the reason some of these cases have gone unsolved is because they are trying to narrow it down to an individual when it is actually an occult terrorist network. They kill in packs, and they kill over decades and generations, and this is what it means to carry the strap, in part. The rest we will get to over time, but this will come in bits and pieces, but this is an excellent place to start. For the research junkies in the audience, you may want to get your pen and paper, because I will be leaving little notes across the screen that I'll want you to write down, because these are going to become important in later episodes, because we're going to be having to double back to these pieces multiple times in order to kind of web together this enigma.
It seems incredible that a man who killed 6 women in the face of a massive manhunt, a media storm, and increasing political outrage could escape detection. But somehow he did. Ever since, many different suspects have emerged. In the 1960s, a lawyer named Montague Druitt was suggested, because his suicide coincided with the end of the Ripper killing spree. In the 1970s, the murders were attributed to the elaborate plot by the Duke of Clarence and his surgeon Sir William Gull to hide the identity of a pregnant mistress. And in the 1990s, American quack Dr. Francis Tumblety came under suspicion because it was alleged he kept a collection of female body parts. There have been many, many more. But not one suspect has ever been placed at a single murder site.
Very many of the suspects are outright outlandish.
Now here I want you to pay close attention to this particular image with specific focus on the words, the window, and the hand placement. Later on, this is going to explain a lot about the increased knife violence in London. This is the first photo that I have chosen to begin with some of the photographic analysis from archives of the Jack the Ripper case. In these photographs, there are numerical patterns, word patterns, and photographic patterns I want you to observe. And while I go through this, I want you to keep in the back of your mind the elements of the Jamal Khashoggi case that happened in October of 2018, and we're going to connect that. As a matter of fact, as we go through this, you'll start to see the pattern form that this signature applies to a multitude of crimes. This includes the stalking of myself and family for pursuing this analysis research. This would also be the photograph that is the key to understanding what was happening with my company, business relations, my family, my property in West Texas. So it's a very significant picture in this story. Once more, we're going to take a brief little side note, and I want you to observe the pattern above the dress of Queen Elizabeth here from the mid-1500s. Again, I'm trying to impress the theory that this is kind of where the Masonic roots started, was with the Dutch Revolt. When you cross-reference the Ripper file with the couture that Elizabeth is wearing, with Aztec symbology, where you can see the clear square that is consistent throughout this research, along with the sickle-type throat-cutting symbology that matches the two strands of pearls that she's also wearing here in this image. And we see a consistent pattern with that of Masonry symbology. Now, in this particular image, I would like you to pay close attention to the right hand on the woman's shoulder, the hat that is similar to Elizabeth's attire, and the hand around the waist on the left. And again, the couture of Queen Elizabeth, along with the East India Trading Company, the Knight Codex, and once more with the Mason symbology with the sign of Libra that is consistent with the lower left-hand corner with the T.R. Here's the second photograph that I have chosen to analyze for the purpose of this segment in regards to the Jack the Ripper case. Again, you're going to be taking notes and you're going to be observing patterns, numerical shapes. In this, you will see the A and the M, the W and the A, how it's a mirror reflection. You're going to see the circles at the end. This is going to connect to another case I'll show you at a later time. You're also going to see the way these words and apron is going to be very significant as we move forward into me explaining the apron effect and this image, which, if you'll notice, the scales on the cuff, the V formation, including the two triangles here in the image, where you see the men wearing hats that appear to be of Spanish design, as well as the two children staring at the table filled with round objects that are symbolic of the Aztec skull collecting. The smoke from the woman's mouth, the blurred out eyes. This is going to come later as I cover the Christ Church mosque shooting. You're going to see the V shape on the left cheek. You're going to see the mask in the back. You're going to see this particular square black on his shoulder. You're going to see the look on the children's faces. This little curvy snake-like pattern is going to make a difference later. And this R is going to be significant, as is the ER. As we begin evolving from photographic analysis and linguistic analysis, and move into cryptology later on, this ER is going to be very, very significant, and you're going to see that it will pop up in the Ripper letters that were written to police. And this is also a signature where the Zodiac Killer was also writing letters, and I'm going to show you how there are patterns between the Jack the Ripper letters and literally almost identical symbology in the Zodiac Killer. Equally important when we move into cryptology and begin analyzing the Ripper letters and the Zodiac Killer letters is the dots between the T and the R, as well as the dot next to the R where it says another murderer, the last R with a dot at the end of the R. Keep in mind the apron. I'm going to cover the Zodiac letters later in the segment, but just so you get a taste of where we're going with this right now, I want you to observe the 2 and 1 pattern in the Zodiac Killer letter with that of the police news from the Ripper, where it is 2 at the top and 1 at the bottom. Here once more is the letter sent to the San Francisco editors of 3 papers written by the Zodiac Killer, the 408 Cipher. And here is the Ripper. You will notice that the bottom left letter looks identical to that of the pillow on her chest. This is another element that makes this picture so key to unraveling this enigma, because this is actually a segue into the ancient heraldry, which I believe is the roots of this terrorist cult network, dating back to at least the mid-1500s to late 1500s, when things started to kind of formulate. For those of you who may not be aware, a cushion in ancient heraldry times signifies the marks of authority. we have the Zodiak 408 Cipher. In it, he says his identity is included, which he is right. You will notice on the right-hand side, the east side, there is a triangle with the thumbprint ID with a G, and if you travel east to west, you will see the G stands for 1, which is 11. As we count east to west 10 spaces, you will see that we end up with an upside down or a mirror reflection of the Libra sign, which is also here in the TR of the Ripper news article, as well as the Libra sign once again. And once more with the Ripper art, noticing the placement of her hand on the wall being identical to that of the left hand of Libra.
For the Freemasons, the hidden history begins inside a sacred temple 1,000 years before Christ, with the shadowy figure at the heart of Freemasonry, Hiram Abiff, also known as the widow's son.
There is no one version of the Hiram Abiff legend, just as there is no one version of any legend. According to the Freemasons, the widow's son of Hiram Abiff is the master builder of King Solomon's temple.
The temple will house the stone tablets inscribed with the 10 Commandments and the holy presence of God himself. According to Freemason legend, Israel's King Solomon has received the design directly from God. Hiram, too, knows the secrets of the divine plan.
In the story, Hiram Abiff is accosted by 3 junior workers who are jealous of the fact that they have not been given all the secrets of Masonry, and they try to extort them from Hiram Abiff.
The workers believe that a single secret code word will give them Hiram's knowledge of God's divine plan, and with it, magical powers.
Each one of the 3 assailants of Hiram is constantly asking for the secret word. And Hiram keeps telling them, you know, this is strange. Why are you asking for this?
Every day at noon, Hiram leaves the worksite to pray. So the 3 workers lie in wait at the temple's 3 doors. As Hiram approaches the east door, the first man stops him and demands the secret. Hiram replies that when the temple is finished, he will be told the secret word.
The word is given in recognition of accomplishment. When a Mason has proved himself as an apprentice and as an expert craftsman, he's then recognized by being given the word of a master Mason.
Rebuked, the man slashes at Hiram's throat with a sharpened stone. Hiram escapes, but at the south door, the second man demands the secret. Again, the wounded Hiram refuses and is struck with a Mason square. Hiram staggers to the west door. Again, the demand. Again, he refuses and is finally dealt the death blow. As he dies, he cries, "Who will help the widow's son?" The phrase will become the Freemasons' universal cry for help from brother Masons. Hiram Abiff's refusal to give up his secret knowledge to the undeserving makes him the greatest of Freemason heroes.
Hiram Abiff represents the free Mason. That is, the builder who is free, who has a free mind, and that means freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of movement, all these liberties that we cherish today. So you're a builder and a free one, and you're always under attack by 3 major enemies: ignorance, fanaticism, and tyranny.
He lived up here in Doveton Street. This area, approximately 25-30 minutes walk from where the majority of the crimes took place. Also of interest is where he worked. Up here in the Broad Street goods depot, which is attached to the station. He worked there for 20 years. He knew this area well. There was a corridor there between where he lived and where he worked, and he had intimate knowledge of this area.
Charles Lechmere worked as a delivery driver for a company based at Broad Street He started his shift at 4 a.m., working Monday to Saturday. His two shortest routes to his work both took 40 minutes to walk, meaning he left home well before dawn.
So the Ripper murders, very, very interesting set of patterns of behaviour which result when we look at this geographically. There are certain flags, red markers if you like, that really try to indicate that there's something that links Lechmere to these crimes.
I like to kill him softly.
The first crime took place here, the George Yard buildings in Gunthorpe Street, Whitechapel. Martha Tabram.
Martha Tabram was murdered in a stairwell just yards from Old Montague Street, one of the most direct routes in Charles Lechmere's walk to work. The coroner said she was killed between 2:30 and 3:30 a.m., a time when Lechmere should have been passing nearby to get to his job. There were 39 stab wounds. A long, narrow street, mostly overlooked by terraced houses and with no immediate escape routes. Just 15 minutes before Polly Nichols was killed, a policeman passed the murder site on his regular beat. The street was deserted. At both ends of Bucks Row, two other policemen passed every half hour. There were several night watchmen within earshot. It seemed impossible for the killer to escape. The few pieces of solid evidence that have come to light have been quickly discredited. A diary supposedly written by a wealthy cotton merchant was admitted to be a forgery. Medical records linking an eminent Welsh doctor to a victim were secretly altered. And most recently, a shawl purported to belong to one of the victims was never listed among her possessions by the police. And the DNA analysis that linked it contained major scientific errors. After more than a century of searching, the identity of the Ripper was no nearer a solution. Then in 2005, a group of amateur enthusiasts started to investigate Charles Cross and solved the mystery of his identity. They noticed that at the address Charles Allen Cross had given the inquest, a man called Charles Allen Lechmere was registered as head of the family. The two men shared the same first and middle names. Was it a coincidence? Scouring the records charting Lechmere's life, they searched for evidence that they might be the same person. In an 1861 census record, they found the breakthrough they were looking for. In it, Charles Allen Lechmere was recorded with the surname Cross. He was 12 years old and registered under the name of his stepfather at the time, Thomas Cross. In all, there are 120 official documents charting the life of the man who, at the inquest, called himself Cross. In 119, his name is Charles Allen Lechmere. Once Christer had his real name, it launched the next phase of his investigation. The breakthrough opened the door to a deluge of spine-tingling new evidence. Christer started to believe that he'd finally found Jack the Ripper. Forensic physician Jason Payne James has assessed the post-mortem report. Using a forensic graphical model, he calculates how long Polly Nichols' injuries would have taken to inflict.
Well, here we have a bruise running along the lower part of the jaw on the right side of the face. These are the kind of marks consistent with manual strangulation. We then have injuries to the neck. The incision completely severed all the tissues down to the vertebrae. Either side of the neck, here and here, are the neurovascular bundles. So if she was not already dead, would undoubtedly have killed her.
In all, Dr. Payne James identifies 12 major stab injuries to Polly Nichols.
Contrasting the injuries to Polly Nichols with some of the other victims, clearly what we have here is no removal of organs, no removal of skin tissue. Realistically, I think the entire process lasted no more than a couple of minutes.
It took the murderer as little as 2 minutes to take the life of Polly Nichols. If it was Lechmere, the time he possibly had alone with her would have been enough. But if Lechmere had just killed Nichols, why wasn't he covered in blood? Lechmere spoke to 2 people immediately after the murder. Surely they would have noticed blood on him. But Dr. Payne James believes that the killer would not necessarily have had blood on his hands.
I think there's always an assumption that somebody stabbed to death, there's going to be blood everywhere. I think it's entirely possible that there wouldn't necessarily be large amounts, or indeed any blood necessarily obvious on that person.
Dr. Payne James has worked out that, like the other victims, Polly Nichols was strangled to death first. Without blood pressure, there would have been no arterial spray. A simple demonstration can illustrate the dramatic effect of a knife attack on a living victim.
What we have here is a very simplistic system containing fluid to mimic blood. I'm going to cut this vessel and we're going to see what happens. And quite dramatically, you can see with a higher pressure system, you would see this repeated spray.
When the heart is beating, any cutting of major arteries will result in a spray of blood. Polly Nichols' crime scene showed little signs of blood. Suggesting that she was dead before the Ripper used his knife.
Although we know that carotid arteries were cut, it would seem that that was after death. So it may just leak out and dribble out or drain out around the contours of the neck, in this case, over a period of minutes.
Born in London's East End, as a child, Lechmere moved many times. By the time of the murders, he was 39 years old, married, and had fathered 12 children. Yet he always lived with or close to his mother.
His mother seems to be a pivotal person in his family. She had managed to marry 3 times and certainly seems to be a domineering force in Charles's life. He lived with her for some time. He lived just down the road from her.
Then, just 2 months before the killings began, Lechmere moved away, leaving his eldest daughter behind with his mother. Gareth wonders whether the event hides a family trauma.
There was something potentially there, some animosity of some sort, which had caused him to move. Interestingly, also, one of his daughters stayed behind living with his mother. That also is quite peculiar. Such a big kind of upheaval in his family life at that stage, only 2 months before the murders started, is certainly potential of significance.
Historian Arthur Ingram is an expert on Pickfords, the company Lechmere worked for as a horse-drawn delivery driver. His research has uncovered that Charles Lechmere's job was to deliver meat to butchers around East London.
The men of Pickford's working out of Broad Street were handling huge chunks of meat. But there'd be oddments around any carcass, whether it be liver, heart and tongue. It is a dirty job, and his clothes would be dirty, and he may be soiled with his hands or his face.
Arriving at Broad Street Depot in an apron smeared with blood would barely have raised an eyebrow. Then he could melt away into a dark warren of meat carts and stables for 300 horses.
Broad Street, because of its importance as the third largest station in London at that time, there was considerable space taken over, not only for the stables, for the horses, but for the carman to keep himself clean.
Broad Street Depot would have been an ideal hideout for a killer. It is the final marker for the three key elements of Charles Lechmere's life: home, family, and work.
If we draw a triangle around these points, we can see that all of the crimes would be contained within that triangle. Lived, worked, and where he moved to in his new location.
I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find the kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye.
He was mocking me, is what he was doing. He was playing with me. He did it for shock effect, and it worked.
Surviving victim Michael Mageau was able to describe the gunman when interviewed by Vallejo police detective Ed Rust. Ed Rust. According to Mageau, the suspect was a white male adult, short, possibly 5 feet 8 inches tall, heavy-set, approximately 195 to 200 pounds or larger, with short, curly hair, light brown, almost blonde, and a large face. Investigators from Vallejo and Benicia believed that they were searching for the same killer, and the bold, sinister phone call raised fears that the gunman would strike again. As in the Benicia case, the investigation examined the possibility that Darlene may have been killed by someone she knew. Vallejo detectives interviewed Darlene's family, friends, co-workers, and others, but no one could recall anyone who had ever bothered, harassed, or threatened Darlene, other than one individual, named George. According to unconfirmed claims described in police reports, Darlene allegedly stated that George was a customer at the restaurant and she had repeatedly rejected his unwanted advances. George allegedly broke into Darlene's home and threatened to rape her. Investigators interviewed George and he provided an alibi for his whereabouts at the time of the murder, which was reportedly confirmed by his wife. George was eliminated as a suspect, and police could not identify any other potential suspects who would know.
The following is an analysis of the use of a Kant philosophy, meaning beforehand, which explains the travel path chosen beginning at the Kantstraße and heading towards the Budapeststraße. December 19, 2016, Berlin Christmas market attack. You'll see elements of the signature, including elements that I believe were used to target UN targets. You'll see here on the Jefferson Memorial the use of 4 and 2. To observe the upcoming photo of the gentleman storming the press conference that Trump held at his Scottish golf course, where the gentleman comes and holds up 2 red dots on each side, which you will see is significant with the U.S. border, as well as the Aztec symbology that's been present throughout this segment. I'm also going to be showing you social media analysis that allowed me to begin to see that a former business partner was involved with some of this activity during our trip to Paramount Studios, some of the symbology that was present, and a large driving factor as to why I chose to go underground. You'll see many of the travels that he documented coincided with a lot of President Trump's travels and terrorist activities that were occurring. You can see the church here at the Berlin Christmas market. Here's his van. And you'll see that the pattern was consistent with the Grand Hall dining, the Aztec, Mayan symbology. You can see here the half moon shape of the Washington, D.C. But this is most important, is the east to west pattern, the north and south pattern in Pecos, where I believe my father's body was dumped. And notice that 17 runs north and south, and the one in Berlin runs east to west, as well as that is consistent with the embedded geographical marker in the video, as well as some of the Native American priori that was documented. Obviously the rose representing War of Roses, the 2 and 4 symbology, again the square, the duplication similar to the van, the Grand Hall. And of course, here is the day after the ISIS terrorist assassination. Here's again Germania City, which is the dream of the Fourth Reich. Again, I'm just going to let some of this roll. You can see the different and similar agriculture, the hair that is noticed, including matching the art of night writing. You can see the 4-in-1 pattern here. You can see the half moon pattern, the eye. Much of this here, along with the particular haircut that he used. And you'll begin to see here that it coincides with West Texas Tigua Indians, as well as the arrow here that is symbolic in much of the masonry and symbology that we've been pointing out in this segment. Now, here you'll see also the triangulation and the similar geographical street markers, along with the step-down process, which is similar to that of West Texas. This again matching the bow tie symbology. You can see here that the travel path actually cuts off a triangle type square off of the chosen target, which is a priori, I believe, to the pipe bombings that occurred. Here you can see that from the driver's point of view, the truck lands at 11. You can see here the blue chosen writing that is symbolic, the red and white for Germania. I'm going to do a segment to break down the Berlin market attack by itself. I'm just briefly reviewing this, but when you put all the elements together, I believe what we see is a Scottish Masonic Rite Aryan Brotherhood connection, which is the rise of the Fourth Reich, attempting to put the Germania city into Cornutus, West Texas, aka the former Republic of Texas, along with the Texas Nationalist Movement, which has been funded by President Putin and the Kremlin, and you take into consideration the billions of dollars poured in by Prince MBS, who murdered Khashoggi, and some of the other elements. So this is a lot to digest, and we're going to get to it, but for right now, I'm briefly going over how this is connected, but we will be covering specifically the French Berlin Market attack, the Berlin Market attack, along with the London Bridge attack, and breaking that down more in detail.
3 million Freemasons are spread all over the world, forming the world's oldest existing secret society. Many are educated men,